This is the time to describe the user's views. To do so, we need to identify real-life objects. A useful tip is to pay attention to the substance that users mention in their descriptions, such as invoices, clients, products, etc., and then represent them as GeneXus objects. GeneXus developers don't work on low-level tasks, such as designing tables, normalizing, programming, and the like. Instead, their work is high-level activity, such as describing the reality of users. After that, GeneXus analyzes the defined objects and starts designing the database and creating the application programs for the selected platform in a fully automated manner. Let's suppose that the pharmacy requesting the application has to register all the products it has on sale. In order to describe each real-life object identifier, you have to create a GeneXus object as a transaction type, but beware, because this is not related to the concept of database transactions. To create a transaction object, select File, New, Object in the toolbar. This is a dialog box to select the type of object you want to create. Select Transaction in this case, and enter a name for it, which in this case will be Product. By clicking on the Create button, the product transaction is created and kept open, ready for you to start defining as a structure. Each transaction has some sections that I'll explain gradually. Specifically, the transaction structure makes it possible to find the attributes or fields that describe a real-life object. Let's suppose that the pharmacy told you that for each product it has to register the product code, name, sale price, stock available, and the type of products, such as medicines, cosmetics, etc., etc. This data that must be registered for each product matches the attributes that we'll create for this transaction. Let's press Enter, and you'll see that the first line in this transaction structure is automatically ready for you to define the first attribute. Also, the icon of a key is linked with this line. The reason for this is that in every transaction, an attribute or a set of attributes must be set as a unique identifier or primary key. The purpose of a unique identifier or primary key is to uniquely identify each product or any object of reality. In other words, the final app users won't be able to enter two products with the same identifier value. Clearly, the primary key of the product transaction will be the product code. So let's define it. By pressing the period key on the keyboard, GeneXus will automatically show the transaction name as a prefix in the attribute name. You'll only have to type code after the product prefix. Then, by clicking on the Tab key, you can choose the data type to be stored for this attribute. The default data type is a 4-digit number with no decimals. However, the pharmacy requested that product codes should always have a numerical value of up to 10 digits, so you have to change its length to 10. By pressing Enter, a new line is open where you can start defining the second attribute. Again, you have to type the period key on the keyboard and complete the name attribute with name, that is, product name. It'll be of a character type with a length of 50. Now you must add the product price attribute of a number type with 9 digits and 2 decimals. As you'll probably need to create more attributes, prices or amounts, that is, when the pharmacy buys or sells products, it may be a good idea to create a generic definition type for all prices. To do this, in the type column, you just have to write price equal before the type you have selected. Then press Enter, and you'll see the product price attribute has been set as a price type, that is, price. The definition of price with a number type of 9 digits with 2 decimals is called domain. Domains allows making generic definitions. One of its advantages is that if later on you need prices to be numbers of a longer length, you'll only have to change the domain definition, and all the attributes based on the domain will be updated in a single step. To view the domains created in the knowledge base, select View, Domains in the toolbar. As you can see, GeneXus creates some domains automatically. Given domain, the Properties window is refreshed with its properties. Note that in addition to setting the data type for the domain, you can also define some other interesting properties for it. The properties window will be refreshed every time you select another attribute, domain, object, etc., with the corresponding properties available for configuration in each case. If the property panel is not visible, you can press F4 to open it. Let's go back to the product transaction, where the next attribute you have to define is product stock of a number type of 4 digits. Now you must record the product type. You can create an attribute called product type as a character of 50. But what happens if a user wants to create two products of the same type? They have to enter the same type name twice, being very careful to type it exactly the same. Later on, they may need to search for all the products of the same type, so all the types should have been written in the same way. It seems more reasonable to enter the type of product only once in a single location and then assign the corresponding product type to each product. So let's delete the product type attribute from the structure and save the product transaction as shown. For each transaction, GeneXus automatically designs a web layout interface based on the defined structure. This web interface will enable users of the application when they are executing the application to add, update or delete products. Now let's create another transaction to register the product types. We can press N to open the new object selection panel, and it will be called product type. We have to register the code and name for each product type. So we can create the attributes product type code. That will be a 4-digit number, and product type name, a character of 50. Naming attributes with a transaction name as a prefix not only makes defining attributes easier and faster, but it's also a convention of the GeneXus community to understand an attribute name more easily wherever it may be and to know which object it describes. Look at the properties of the product type code attribute. The autonumber property is set to false by default. By setting it to true, all the new product types entered by the user will be automatically numbered in sequence. Let's set the autonumber property to true for this identifier attribute and save the product type transaction. As I explained before, each transaction has a web interface automatically designed by GeneXus according to its structure. This is the product type web interface. Now, assign a product type to each product. To do so, go back to the product transaction, add a new line to its structure, and type the letter P. The list of attributes in the knowledge base beginning with that letter will be displayed. By selecting product type code, the entire definition of the attribute will be displayed. In this transaction, you must also include the product type name attribute, because when users execute this transaction and select a product type code, they'll want to see the product type name. Let's focus on these two attributes included in more than one transaction. Product type code is the identifier attribute in the product type transaction. More specifically, it's the primary key of that transaction. So, when a primary key is included in another transaction, GeneXus understands that there the attribute plays the role of a foreign key. By including an attribute that is a transaction primary key in another transaction allows you to relate both transactions. GeneXus establishes relations through attributes names in each transaction. So, when you find attributes with the same name in different transactions, it supposes that they refer to the same concept. The product type name attribute is also present in both transactions. However, it isn't marked as the identifier in any of the defined transactions. Therefore, GeneXus will understand that it is a secondary attribute. It will then include product type name in the product type name physical table that you'll create in the knowledge base and not in the product physical table. The concepts of transactions and physical table are not the same. Remember that transaction is a GeneXus object that you create in the knowledge base to represent an object of reality. When considering the structure and the rest of the transaction structures that you have defined in the knowledge base, and also taking into account some properties, GeneXus will determine the physical tables that you'll create in the database as well as the attributes that belong to those tables. At runtime, when running the web interface of the product transaction, the user must enter for the product type code attribute a value that already exists in the product type table, because product type code is a foreign key in the product transaction. Otherwise, an error will be displayed. If we enter the product type code correctly, the value of the product type name will be obtained automatically and displayed on the screen.